Well, welcome everyone. I am here with my friend Todd Littleton and my other friend who happens to live in the Twin Cities, Dennis Sanders. Um, Dennis, you and I have talked before, so people might remember that conversation. But just introduce yourself to get started.
Sure. Yeah. Uh, Dennis Sanders. I'm the pastor of First Christian Church in St. Paul, Minnesota. I've been there for about 12 years or so. Uh, Graduate of Luther Seminary, and kind of got to know. Well, I followed Jason for a while, but got to know you through the Iowa Preachers Project, especially.
Yeah, he was in our inaugural cohort last year, so that's
Yep. Yes,
and
indeed.
that's where I learned to be able to trust you in this conversation that I've invited you into. Because you got started studying journalism,
Hmm.
and you are so I actually don't even know what your political commitments are. I know that you are very prudent about um, um, kind of fixing on a, a Christological perspective as the church and not losing the gospel in an effort to witness to other things. So that's why
Hmm.
I've asked you to be a part of this. And so, Dennis, I guess um, tell us just what your personal reflections as a pastor have been over these last weeks in the Twin Cities.
Well, I think maybe the most recent reflection, and especially I was actually talking to a person that is a cohort in the second cohort about this with what happened on Saturday with the killing of Alex Preddy, um, really is lament. It's kind of this sense of how long does this continue to happen? Why, God, is this happening? Um, and really hoping and wanting God to be able to come in and deliver us is basically the way that I'm looking at it right now. And so I've been thinking a lot about what does that look like. Um, and my friend who I was communicating with, he was going to be reading Psalm 94, which is a lament psalm. And that sense of the people who are kind of coming down on people and oppressing the people. And this, the writer, the psalmist is really looking to God for help and feeling that sense of abandonment, but yet also faithfulness that God is there, even though it doesn't always feel like it. Is kind of where I'm feeling right now because I think it's a sense of a loss of trust, especially I think for many of us that the federal government was always not perfect, obviously, but at least a resource and that you could go to. And I think a lot of people now are feeling, at least I'm feeling, but I think many others, that's not possible anymore. That we are on our own. Um, that Washington will not listen to us. That in many cases, I think Washington has become Herod, kind of a mad king that is afraid or of anyone usurping their power. And so that's kind of where I'm feeling right now. Is that sense of lament.
And how have you um, dwelt on this, prayed about it, discerned your role as a pastor and a preacher in your community and congregation?
I think that's still being formed. Um, I'm really now interested in doing a lot more reading about lament and where does that fit in the 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 Christian walk because I think it does. And I haven't yet really shared that with my community, but I think that's something I'm starting to do. Um, and it might be even important for us to have things like Bible studies or something that where we can actually talk about this side of our faith and where does lament fit in our faith? Because it does. And I think that what's been happening over the last 5 or 6 weeks has really brought that home to me and
What
to
kind?
others. And yeah, go ahead.
No, you know what have what have people in your congregation and in your neighborhood? What kinds of things have they shared with you?
Well, Sunday, um, it was interesting at our time of prayer. And usually when people come before and share prayers, it's always about different illness or different things that are going, just I think what we expect to hear during a time of prayer. This day, almost every prayer request had something to do with ICE. There was someone in their building who was a cleaner that had been taken. There is a student that is fearful. Um, it just every prayer request this past Sunday was related to that. And so, kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, that brings up lament because you have people that you know who are dealing with this and have come up against this on a day to day basis.
Todd, you mentioned before we started recording that you have gone back to this book that I know Dennis has read too, entitled Karl Barth's Emergency Homiletic. Um, I'm wondering, what thoughts that book has given you in light of where the church finds itself right now.
Um, I mean, I don't want to race to some of the um, what I think have been premature parallels to exact timeframes and circumstances of the end of the Weimar, but I do see um, uh, the pathos that existed. Uh, that um, in the cultural moment, there does seem to be high levels of anxiety, um, and this amplifies those. Um, and I think that um, I'm at that place. I'm not as far along as I'd like to be, but I'm kind of at that place where um, you'll remember this because you're very familiar with it. But where um, when Bart's at one place, he feels a liberty to talk about something, and he's kind of what he has to say is heard. It's not terribly startling, but then when he finds himself in Bonn and he begins to kind of exert the same sort of sense, the reaction is obviously terribly different. And you're not from here, you don't know enough, so it's almost as though the observations are consistent across the board. Um, but the context forced him to kind of think again about how to say what I say, because I'm not really necessarily from this particular location where all this is happening. Even though he did end up becoming dual citizen, um, and I think for a pastor, the thing that I hear Dennis talking about is a little bit of that betwixt and between that happens to us because I don't know if Dennis grew up in Minneapolis, for instance, but somewhere 12 years doesn't necessarily make you from here. I've been here 31 years, and I'm regularly told I'm not from here. Um, by virtue of everything anyone would see, I look like I belong here. But I don't share the same deep histories that some do, et cetera. So I feel like you're kind of in almost a double binds place where there's something you need to say, but because you don't necessarily always have the relational cachet to say the things that would be most helpful, you're always trying to find out what's the better way, what's the better context. And I don't think Sunday morning in a message is necessarily, and I don't hear Dennis saying that, but I don't think that's necessarily the place. But at the same time, I think we've got to find a way, like what you did last Sunday, for instance. There are phrases that become we become socially aware to because of these events. So if someone wasn't paying attention when you said we have plenty of whistles, um, immediately they should go back and listen to your sermon again because you've drawn attention to a particular thing going on, and you're trying to get us to see Jesus in a particular way, God's way in a particular order. And if I've just been rocking you along because you're not in front of a congregation and you're a little less lilty than you normally are, that might prompt me to go back and go, "Oh, I think I missed something here. Where's that connection?" So I think that's crafty. And so I think that I hear Dennis saying, "I'm trying to discern at that space. How do you bring those things together?" Because, direct tends to repel.
Mhm.
And there may be some, I don't know, there may be some in Dennis's congregation that are quietly going, "Yeah, I don't think this is so bad."
Hmm.
And yet there are others who are bringing prayer requests like, "I'm losing friends, I'm experiencing grief, this loss is what am I gonna do? I'm surrounded by these anxious moments." And, I can imagine it being incredibly precarious.
Hmm. Yeah, there's somewhere I think in several Robert Capon books where he says that you don't need to talk about sin in your sermons because people already know what that is, and I don't know that that's actually true.
Right, right, right.
I don't know that that's always the case, but um, Dennis, I'm wondering, one of the things I've respected about you over the last couple of years is you are very hesitant, patient, about not getting caught up in um, cultural antagonisms, um, following the memes. So I'm wondering if, as a pastor who is also a trained journalist, um, are there aspects of what has been going on in your home that you think those of us in other parts of the country misunderstand or don't quite understand because of how it's portrayed um, in the media?
Well, I think what they may not understand is, I mean, it's funny because you kind of brought up the memes, but people have talked about on social media that it's a lot worse than what maybe you described. And I think that there is truth to that. Um, and I also think there's truth to the fact that how people are emotionally affected. Uh, they're you have people kind of looking around to see what's out there. Is there a strange looking vehicle nearby? Is there a whistle being blown? Um, all of that, I think, kind of grates on people's sense of well being, I think, after a while. Um, and so that you're always kind of alert and wondering what's going to happen next. Um, and I think that that is something that I think people need to be aware of, that there are people really, um, as much as you hear on the outside of how people are coming together, and that is all wonderful and important, this all has an effect on people too, and a negative effect, and that can also, um, that's also something that wears heavy on people. And so I think looking at that from a pastoral perspective is, how do you offer a word of hope, of comfort in that time? Um, I think that for me is also important because people need to hear that. And I think there is sometimes underneath a sense that, is this ever going to end? And people need, I think what people may, from outside of the Twin Cities and outside of the state of Minnesota, may not understand is, for a lot of people, there's a feeling of wonder, or how will this end? Will this end? Um, and that what people, at least I think a lot of pastors need, is what word of hope, and how do we send the word of the gospel into that can give that sense of hope? Because it's not optimism that is what we need to have now. It's really the hope of Christ and the hope of the resurrection.
Uh, so you've mentioned lament, and Todd, you mentioned pathos. I don't know about you guys. I'm assuming that, you know, um, this past weekend I was doom scrolling in a way that I haven't since the pandemic.
Hmm.
That, like, those two events are not the same, but like emotionally, that's what it felt like.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, so just think theologically, the two of you. It's because it's for me it's the um it's the doubled nature of it. It's to see so many videos of someone who's disarmed being shot in the back. Um, so it's the act itself. It's the the clapping from the other officers, like that complete lack of empathy. Um, that that kind of speaks to a culture. Um, and then third, it's the immediate character assassination of the victims.
Mm.
And then like the doubling down on the lies. So it's this lack of respect for human life, followed by like a lack of respect for the truth. And it just it was shocking to me, and I feel,
Mm.
I feel like like we've been in this place for a while now, but it was shocking.
But it was a whole different level of shock. I mean, you know, I've seen some of the videos, and I wasn't seeing them all the time, but I wanted to at least know what was happening. But they're so shocking that they just, you expect that's something that you will see in other countries. You don't expect that you will see that here in the United States. And then to have the government, our federal government, basically tell us what we all just saw wasn't real, um, is, again, it's mind boggling to hear that. Um, and it reminds me of something I heard recently about, that there has to be the official story, and that the federal government was trying to put out the official story. And I mean, that is, again, brings me all back to lament, because here you have this government that is literally telling us not to believe our eyes. And this sounds like something out of some type of weird dystopian novel.
Hmm. And it's you mentioned lament. It's Todd and I are both preaching in the Psalter right now. Um, and a Christian reading of the Book of Psalms is that they are the
Mhm.
prayers of Christ. Um,
Yes.
that like they're Christ praying with His people. And I think that's a helpful reminder that we 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 can't have accounts of Christianity or definitions of the gospel that are completely abstracted away from the life of of Jesus as it's conformed to the Torah. Um,
Mhm.
and
Mm.
and Todd, not to pick on you, but like your neck of the Christian family tree seems to be the the quickest to justify their politics by any means necessary.
Yeah. I can always count on you for making sure that. But I was going to. If you hadn't, I actually was, because there were a couple of people who, when those videos started coming out, actually, as they were sharing them, said, "Listen, you should not keep watching this." They were really sincere people who were saying, like, this is traumatic, and to continually, keep watching this is to just relive that trauma. Even though it's not yours, you're reliving the trauma someone else has. And if you've got any compassion or empathy about you, then you're just kind of, replaying that trauma over and over again. And I found myself doom scrolling. Me and my wife, we'd talk about it. We had to kind of, quit for a while, and then I talked yesterday for a while to our youth pastor, and her husband is a brown skinned fellow and really nice guy, but she's always on level 9 or 10, because that could be my husband. And so, um, but to your point, the most mortifying reality was to see the sudden um, capitulation by some who have, to me, um, adulterated not Southern Baptist but Baptist history by by actually having the banner of their organization behind them, where they're like, more of this should happen. And so then, to your point about, preaching through the Psalter, um, I, my knee jerk is I'm going to find me an imprecatory psalm, and I'm praying that to that sucker right there. Um, but to your point, though, that uh, those prayers are pointing to a way, and that way is not away from Jesus, but it is to Him, because they're all about Him. So it is one of those dissonant experiences that you're just like, I was texting with a U.S. congressperson, and I was expressing my disbelief. And I have to be frank, I was also expressing my disbelief that this particular person has said nothing publicly about this in a way that would reflect what I've known for a long time to be his personal Christian commitments. And at some point, I keep looking for that line at which it gets crossed, that someone with Christian commitments is no longer caring about reelection.
Mm-hmm.
And we've not found that line. And so it's so disturbing. And as nice as I could be, I had to say, this is terribly disturbing. So yeah, we do have some of the most notorious, somehow connected people who tell the world that they happen to be part of the branch of our tree, and I don't even think they're on the tree. So um, it's very tough. It's very tough. I feel myself apologizing all the time.
So I wanted to read this. Jordan Daniel Wood is a patristic scholar. He's Roman Catholic. He's become a friend. And he posted this a couple days ago, and I think this is absolutely right. He says, I think the thing I will never understand is how anyone can be so entirely and blindly loyal to their preferred political party that they justify not only that party's brazen opposition to the rights and amendments that such a party supposedly cherished, but even feel the need to justify the obvious, ongoing, immediate lies that such a party administration tells us. I lean left, as you may have noticed, but I would never feel the slightest need to justify lies. For example, when Biden oversaw the first 18 months of Israel's genocidal campaign to exterminate the Palestinians, I had no qualms whatsoever challenging his administration's constant lies and false justifications. In fact, the most open criticism of Biden and Obama's drone wars, etc., I've never heard I, I've ever heard came not from any right wing or self centrist outlets, but from the leftist ones such as Democracy Now. It is completely reasonable, indeed laudable, both to have your political preferences in general and to tell the truth in particular cases. You can say, for instance, that you hate the libs or whatever, and that a cold blooded execution of a legal observer who did absolutely nothing wrong is wrong. There's nothing shameful or contradictory in that at all. Precisely the contrary. It shows that you are still a human being with a beating heart and a shred of integrity in your soul.
Yeah, I saw that. That was very good.
I think it's part of this, Dennis. Again, you know, you study journalism and now you work with words as a preacher. That we live in a culture where words have become cheap,
Very
and
cheap.
and the internet and social media incentivizes the most outrageous exaggerations and lies. I think maybe as Christians, we've lost sight of the fact that, like, Jesus is the truth. Like with a capital T, and therefore, like you can't obey him or follow him or even have faith in him if the truth is not something that you take seriously. Um,
Well, and I think it also comes down to, I think for a lot of people, Jesus is their mascot, not their
Mm,
Lord.
mm, mm.
I think, I mean, it's not just on the right, but it's being mostly expressed right now on the right. Jesus is a mascot. It's not for these people their Lord. Because if it were their Lord, then they would be questioning, is this right? Is this correct? You're not going to just be rah rah when someone basically just got gunned down on the street like a mob hit. That's not what you do.
and I should, because we've had a lot of people join since we started. That you are not someone I would characterize as a progressive activist. um,
No,
so
no.
that because Todd exists in a denomination where a lot of people's Christianity is just an excuse to be a right wing Republican, and I exist in a denomination where people's Christianity is really just Jesus is the way to get to uh, progressive politics, and you're not either of those things. You're just a pastor in a place where this has to be talked about.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it's really about how do we remain faithful in this time, and where does the gospel show forth in this time? And as we were talking about Karl Barth, I think that he is kind of important because
Mm.
I think he was trying to get people to focus on that at a time, especially in the German church, where it was basically Jesus was your mascot. It was the national mascot, and that didn't turn out so well
No,
for them.
I know this just from having read Bonhoeffer's lectures on homiletics with Ken and Tier. That by the time Bonhoeffer is serving as the director at Finkenwald, the emergency pastors seminary, in the German church, the baptismal liturgy concluded with at the end of the prayer was and may he or she grow up to be just like Adolf Hitler and Heinrich Himmler. Like it,
Oh,
yeah. I
that's
mean,
wonderful.
and again, I'm not trying to draw analogies to certain people, although the one guy does wear the Nazi coat and have the Nazi hair. Like it's
Yeah,
kind of hard not to. But it is a reminder, I think, Bart and Bonhoeffer and what they were doing. It's a reminder that it's very easy for the church to quickly lose the plot and not realize they've done so.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's that the Christians who went to that church that had that baptismal formula, they didn't go to church wanting to be heretics. It's just they slipped into it by drifting away from the gospel. And it's instructive too, I think, right? That Karl Barth was someone who was very politically engaged, and so was Dietrich Bonhoeffer. But they saw it as a theological emergency, right? The very first, Bart's like, okay, we can't have those people teaching our students how to preach.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was, his concern was what message are people going to hear in the church? And Bonhoeffer, I think he suffers from being too well known and too little read. And so it's possible to have an image of him in your head that doesn't match who he actually was. And so if if you read the sermons he was preaching during the Nazification of the church, he's not talking about current events at all in any of his sermons. But when the confessing church pastors asked for him to lead a retreat, right, one summer over a couple of days, he decided to give a couple of lectures on how to read the Book of Psalms Christologically, which was a book that had been neglected as being too Jewish. So he's making, as what Todd was saying earlier, it's you can be relevant without losing hold of the scriptures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
I'm sorry. There's a conversation going on here in the chat, and I'm
Yeah, but you put his name in there. The guy asked about Wood's that Wood quote you read.
Yeah, it's Jordan here. Can I drop it in there?
So,
Dennis, yeah, go ahead, Todd.
So, Dennis, so while you're, in this space of trying to determine and discern how to lead through this, one of the questions I have is, and I don't, don't take this as personal as take it as personal as you care to, but so what are you doing for you? Pastors often feel like, okay, I'm here. I'm here for the prayer time, and people are coming and they're giving me these prayers, and it can be quickly overwhelmed. So, what are some things you do or are doing, or what groups are you kind of connecting with that give you sounding boards or confidants to not try to bear that all by yourself?
Well, it's been good to talk with fellow pastors, especially in other parts of the country. Just kind of, here's what I'm feeling, and sometimes just being honest what I'm feeling. And they've been, I think, a good sounding board in kind of sharing. Here's where here's what I think. Here's what And I think that helps, especially for someone that is not right in the middle of all of this, to offer that. That's really helpful. I've also I do it anyway, but it helps to walk a lot. of course, now indoors because it's really cold.
Sure.
Um, but to walk and not necessarily be listening to stuff on and doom scrolling or podcasts, but just to walk and to um, be able to kind of just zone out for a little
Mm,
bit at
mm,
least.
yeah.
Um, and I think it helps to for me, especially just to do things. One of the things that people have been trying to do in our area is just visiting, especially immigrant businesses.
Mm,
Um, and there is a sense of solidarity, but also just a sense of fun in the midst of all of this that I think is helpful. So
yeah.
that I think has been things that I've been doing. And there's probably more that I could be doing, but
Sure.
you know,
Well, we always come to that. We pastors always come to that place, but you've
mhm,
got to find the things that it's not a distraction, but it's something that helps diffuse the intensity of the experience. And
mhm.
walking or friendship at an immigrant restaurant, or yeah, I could see a lot of those things. Um, getting the body doing something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So so Dennis, just so I met you through the Iowa Breachers Project last year. This year, we just had our um, second in-person gathering in Memphis a couple weeks ago. Um, and one night, kind of in the hotel bar, we were continuing a discussion about um, the distinction between law and gospel. And my friend Chenda, who's one of the small group leaders, she's from Liberia. She's a United Methodist preacher. She wanted to make the point, that like, well, the law and obedience, the commandments are important in the Black tradition because we're hoping the rest of you like actually start obeying the Lord. um, um, and and so I remember you in Charlottesville last year sharing a story about either was it your dad or your grandfather?
My dad. Yeah.
Um, and the care and the caution he had to take driving to Minnesota um, through Jim Crow South.
Hmm.
And so you've got a particular family history, um, and for you to like mention as you did earlier, um, just how depressing and deflating it was for you to like hear the federal government lying about harm done. Like you're not someone who was previously naive um, uh,
No,
about
no.
the character of our history and our leaders.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's the other thing that I've been thinking about a lot is while this is n- somewhat new to me in the history of our nation, but also in the history for African Americans, it's not. This is something we've dealt with before. The only difference now is that it's everyone dealing with it. Um, but this type of thing where you couldn't trust your government, where you have to be on the lookout, always anxious, um, no wondering what's safe and what isn't safe. That was unfortunately the case for a lot of African Americans, like my dad and other people in my family in Louisiana, um, up until maybe 60 years ago. So this is this is new, but it's familiar, at least
Mm,
from learning from my history and knowing from my own family's history.
Or it's like, well, the Constitution only really says what it says. If the people with guns say it is.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
that's, um, yeah. I mean, Todd, I mean, it's you're older than me, but it's disorienting to have
Mm,
grown up in the '90s where
mm,
there was
mm.
so much paranoia about jackbooted thugs coming um, to you know, and it just it isn't just that the truth no longer matters. It's also that like these convictions seem to be um, well, we don't really believe in the Second Amendment when it applies to Dennis Sanders. Like
Right,
um, so it isn't just what am I saying? It's not just our Christian convictions that can be tossed aside
right,
in the
right.
name of political convenience. It's all these other convictions that can be tossed aside. Um, and and and
Yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah. And add the layer that the disorienting bit is all that we heard in the '90s was it was coming from a particular direction. No one ever guessed it was coming from the place you felt like you were going to be the one threatened. That's the surprising bit. I mean, I grew up in a time where it was the liberals are going to be the ones doing the things we're seeing. So it's an upside down. Uh, this is not exactly how the Left Behind series went.
No,
LaHaye
it
and those
didn't.
guys had us convinced that the liberals were going to do this to all the conservatives.
ta- um. So Dennis, a part of this, you know, I've been to the Twin Cities a few times. I know so many pastors from Minnesota, and quite a number of people in my congregation actually. Talk a little bit about how that part of the country um, is different than Todd's part of the country, but it is. It's that is the place that the progressive movement started.
Hmm.
It it's no matter what like church attendance rates are in your neck of the woods, it is a place that is deeply shaped by a particular kind of Christianity.
Hmm.
Um, talk a little bit about how that's shaped the kind of the protest and the solidarity of the community.
Yeah, and I probably should start by saying that I did not grow up in Minnesota. I grew up in Michigan, but so I kind of come somewhat as an outsider. But I've lived here long enough that I know a lot about what's going on, and obviously the heritage here has been primarily Lutheran, um, and then to a lesser extent Catholic. Um, and actually, it's funny. Last night there was something I saw, maybe it was on Facebook or something, because there's always been this talk about, well, what's behind it, who's coordinating these protests, as if there was some weird clandestine organization. And someone responded, no, it's a bunch of Lutherans. Have you ever seen Lutherans host potlucks? They know how to host potlucks. And the thing is, and being that I'm married to a Lutheran, it's true. And I think that that church background, um, because that's and for many people that has been a primary source of community, has been one of the ways that people, I think, come together. And so it's funny because I think the South has usually been considered a lot more religious, and I think that there is some truth to that. Um, and then there's kind of the upper Midwest where it's also tends to be a little bit more religious, but it's in a very different way. And I think that has lent itself to probably be a tad bit more progressive culture here. Um, and so that makes that different. But I think that's also been why there has been such a kind of response to what's been going on is, I think, because of the churches. Um, and the churches also, I should add, especially the Lutheran churches, played a big role in. refugee resettlement here back in the 70s and 80s, uh, primarily with the Hmong, but also to a lesser extent Somalis. And so you have that connection there too. And I think that has also been something that has made people much more willing to get involved, to be coordinated, because churches, but whether they're Lutheran or Catholic or Presbyterian or what have you, have all been involved in some way of welcoming people here to Minnesota, um, to live and to begin a new life. And so that I think has made this important to people because of that history of always kind of welcoming the stranger, welcoming the newcomer.
Hmm. I think that's how because so as preachers, we have a particular vocation to speak a specific word every week,
Mhm.
right? Um, and so it's not our vocation to um, do hot takes on the headlines from Sunday to Sunday. However, uh, every Christian who is baptized does have a vocation um, to live out their faith and obedience where they find themselves, right? And so
Mhm.
we do have to preach the gospel in a way that can help people make connections to the kind of work that you're talking about.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and care for the stranger is, I mean, it's not a liberal or conservative concern. It's just an ecumenically Christian one. And so that's part of my like. It's hard for me to understand how um, so much of the nativist sentiment against immigrants comes from Christians.
Mm.
Mhm.
Um,
One of the strongest voices, especially for especially when it comes to immigrants, has been, I believe it's called Arrive Ministries, which is kind of the Minnesota arm of World Relief, which is an evangelical organization. And I guess there has been a move here to try to basically detain refugees, have all already been vetted, all done all through that process, and they are being detained. And World Relief, both here in Minnesota and its national head, have been very outspoken on that. Um, and I think that's been important too. That it's basically saying this is wrong. This is part of who we are as Christians, and you cannot do this. And to be able to kind of speak in a way that I think has been, I don't use this word much, but prophetic has been important to see that.
mhm.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I think prophetic's the right word, right? Because there's a way of hearing lament as in, well, I'm just gonna sit over here and cry. um, but but the line between lament and rage is is
Oh,
is
thin.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mentioned this in Memphis that like it I just noticed for the first time, kind of, you read Matthew's gospel straight through, like Jesus sounds exactly like Rachel um, on the cross, so it's like Matthew begins with Rachel weeping for her children. Jesus
Mhm.
sounds like her on the cross. That like we can't really attend to the voice of the Lord if we're shutting out those those cries.
Mm.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I think the other thing that I think about a lot is, and part of this maybe comes from some of, it's been a while and I need to read it again, is readings from James Cone, an African American theologian. And one of the things that he centers a lot about is that sense of Christ on the cross, um, and about maybe the suffering Christ. And I think that's kind of important to see in this context of the suffering Christ? Where are we seeing people in suffering? That's where Christ is, and I think that's important to see as well. Which is, I think, why it can be upsetting to see so many people who say they're Christians not seeing that or not understanding that at all, or trying to put Christ more into the side of injustice. Um, Whereas I think Christ has always been where there has been suffering, because Christ experienced suffering.
Mhm.
That his suffering is incomplete apart from ours, right?
Mm.
Like,
Hmm.
Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Um,
Exactly.
it isn't just that the treatment of these people that we've seen over the last few weeks is a violation of God's will as it's revealed to us. It's that, like, no, like, you're actively persecuting Jesus.
Mhm.
Yes, exactly.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Because almost
Mhm.
all of these immigrants are baptized Christians, like
Hmm.
members
Mhm.
of Jesus's body.
Mhm. Yep.
Well, Dennis, is there anything that we haven't um, brought up that you wish you want people to know?
I think what I would want people to know is to be aware of what's maybe going on in your own communities. Um, some people have sometimes said that this is what's happening here is kind of a test bed of what could happen in other cities across the country. Um, in some cases, it's already happening, and not as on a high of level as here in Minnesota, but it is happening and it
Mhm.
will happen. So to be
Mhm.
aware of that, um, I think as pastors to be prepared of how do you preach in that context, and to not necessarily preach hot takes, because that's not what the people need right now. And they can watch CNN if they need to get a hot take, but how do you preach the gospel in this? And so to be really prayerful about that, to talk with other pastors, and to just kind of prepare and discern how do you preach in this milieu, and and do it in a way that shows integrity.
That's yeah. It's Robert Jensen talks about another Lutheran. Um, Jensen talks about how the gospel can never be preached the same way twice. And by that he means that the promise, Christ is risen indeed, the one who died for your sins. That promise always has to open up the future for the people hearing you, and those people are always living in a very particular present moment. And so the promise of the gospel has to open up possibility for the future from where they are. And that
Mm,
doesn't mean that you're preoccupied with the present, but it has to, it can't just be this generic promise that you're
Mm.
preaching. It's gotta,
Mm.
even if you're not overt in doing it, it's gotta open up the future for where people are at.
Mm.
And
mhm.
that's different from Sunday to Sunday and from place to place, from person to person.
Yeah, it's good.
Well, Dennis, I promised Todd that we would close with him singing this new song by Bruce Springsteen,
No.
"The Streets of Minneapolis." You're not going to do that
Uh,
for us, Todd?
I We'll get Kaiser to, do a
Oh, that's a good
rendition.
idea. Okay.
Hey, Dennis, thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you, and thank you guys for all of your prayers. They are needed and they are welcomed.
And Dennis, before you go, because you preached on about this a little bit on this past Sunday, so where can people find you?
Sure. They can find me at, well, they can find me on Substack. And my main Substack is Church in Maine. And I also have a podcast, which is churchinmaine.org. And where Jason has been on there recently. And other people, just kind of where faith and politics connect and all of that.
Okay. Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.